Hello, my name is Sara Turpin, and I am the Associate Pastor at Buechel Park Baptist Church. Today is Good Friday, and as I thought about what to share with you for a devotional today, I thought that there was really nothing more important than simply hearing the stories together. And because we can't gather together as we normally do, we don't have another opportunity to hear those stories. So today I'd like to share a version of those taken from the Gospel of John, chapters 18 and 19. Following each section, I will extinguish a candle as we grow closer to the cross and to the death of Jesus. After Jesus had washed his disciples' feet and spoken to them about what was to come, he prayed for them. Then they all went out together to a garden. Judas was not with them, having left after dinner, but he knew where they were because they often went there to pray. So Judas led soldiers to Jesus, and they came with their lanterns and torches and weapons. When they came near, Jesus asked, "Who are you looking for?" And they answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am he. And if you are looking for me, let these men go." But Simon Peter took his sword and struck the high priest's slave, cutting off his right ear. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword away. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" And so the soldiers, their officer, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. They took Jesus to Annas, and then to the high priest Caiaphas, who questioned him. Jesus said, "I have spoken openly to the world. I've always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I've said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard what I said to them. They know what I said." When Jesus said this, one of the officials struck him in the face, saying, "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered, "If I have said something wrong, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" Meanwhile, Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. But the woman who guarded the gate to the courtyard said to Peter, "You're not one of this man's disciples too, are you?" Peter said, "I am not." Then Peter went to stand with the slaves and officials around a fire because it was cold. They asked him, "You're not one of these man's disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." Finally, one of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" A third time, Peter denied knowing Jesus. And at that moment, the cock crowed. They took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate. It was early in the morning on Friday. Pilate went out to him and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They said, "He's a criminal." Pilate said to them, "Judge him according to your law." But the Jews replied, "We're not permitted to execute anyone." So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, My kingdom is not from this world. If it were, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate then asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" After he said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" But they shouted in reply, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Barabbas was a bandit. Then Pilate had Jesus flogged. The soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and striking him on the face. Pilate went out again and said, "Look, I find no case against him." But when the chief priests and the police saw Jesus, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him." The Jews answered, "According to our law, he ought to die, because he has claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever, so he asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and the power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." Pilate tried to release Jesus, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out. It was now about noon. He said to the Jews, "Here is your king. Shall I crucify your king?" They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" So Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified. The soldiers took Jesus. They made him carry his own cross, and they went out to the place of the skull, Golgotha. They crucified him there with two others, one on either side. Pilate had an inscription written and put on the cross, which read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews," in Hebrew, in Latin, and in Greek. The chief priests complained to Pilate, asking him to change the sign to read instead, "This man said, I am King of the Jews." But Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." Standing near the cross was Jesus' mother, his mother's sister, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From then on, the disciple took Mary into his home. Later, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, I am thirsty." So they put a sponge full of sour wine on a branch and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. The Jews did not want bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath. So they asked Pilate to have them removed. The soldiers broke the legs of the men on either side of Jesus. But when they came to Jesus, he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. Then Joseph of Arimathea, who was a secret disciple of Jesus because of his fear of the Jews, asked Pilate to let him take away the body of Jesus. Pilate gave him permission, so he came and removed the body. Nicodemus also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices in linen cloths, according to the burial custom of the Jews. And there was a garden in the place where he was crucified. In the garden there was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And so they laid Jesus